The legend of the phoenix, an immortal bird of flames, has been a symbol for resurrection, renewal, hope, and healing for thousands of years. Today, the phoenix is used in tattoos, in fantasy and fiction, movies, games. In short, it is still a relevant pop culture icon even after all these years. Any folk or mythological creature always entices the question, is there a real, living, or extinct animal equivalent? In this investigation, we are going to start from the modern theories and evidence and work our way back. The first theory we will start with comes from a zoologist named Dr. Maurice Burton, who observed his pet bird doing a curious thing. It would find open flames or sources and stick its wings in it. This is a practice called fire bathing and seems to be related to anting, in which birds will purposefully let their wings get attacked by ants. There doesn't seem to be consensus as to the reason that birds do this. Some say it gets them a sort of high or euphoric rush, and so is done purely for pleasure. Others say it is a way to clean and purge toxins and bacteria. Dr. Maurice Burton's book, Phoenix Reborn, offers a purely biological origin to the phoenix through the explanation of fire bathing. Certainly, it can be argued that people before electricity would have kept fires more frequently, and there were also just more birds around humans, as well as many cultures revering birds and regarding them highly in their beliefs. So seeing a bird sacred to your culture putting its wings in fire may have begun the story of the phoenix as natural superstition and romanticization, or just fiction gives way to legends as time goes on. One critique of this theory I will counter-argue, however, it's not like humans were simpletons and couldn't explain why a bird might be near a fire. The only benefit I can give this theory is if the story was a fictionalized version of that in the ancient world, and from there just captivated people's imaginations and then spread as a mythological tale. Overall, I am not a huge fan of this theory, though it is really cool that birds fire bathe. I just don't think it explains the origin of the phoenix. I haven't seen too many real claims of seeing an actual phoenix bird. It seems fairly agreed upon that it is purely mythical. There are a few species of birds people claim became the phoenix through legends. I've also entertained the idea that the phoenix could have been some sort of comet or astrological event, considering the Egyptian legend of the phoenix comes once every 500 years. Stars and planets were often compared or personified into different animals and gods, and seeing a flaming comet streak across the sky could have inspired such ideas of a legendary bird that becomes reborn in cycles. It's not the most convincing theory out there, but it gets us on the right track that the phoenix is more of a cosmological motif dealing with the afterlife and rebirth. Traveling back in time, the Renaissance and medieval iteration of the phoenix occurred primarily through the alchemists and the occasional church literature in which Jesus was compared to the phoenix, as both dealt with resurrection. The alchemists obviously took the idea of the phoenix from older mythologies, but the way they viewed the phoenix was as an element and a process. In certain ways, the phoenix was the act of a material becoming red or igniting or needing to be heated by fire. In other cases, the phoenix represented the lapis itself, also known as the lapis philosophorum, or the philosopher's stone. Almost any time the phoenix was mentioned by alchemists, it was related to its counterpart, which is the dove, and often with serpents as well. The phoenix also signified the sun or the sun's power and the element sulfur. You can see in this alchemical drawing that there are 7 steps, which is the order of the process, and the zodiac corresponds to the timing, while each sign of the zodiac corresponds to an element or chemical substance. Ultimately, this is required to reveal a palace in which the sun and moon form the dome, and on that dome is the lapis in the form of a phoenix. This illustrates not only the complexity of alchemical manuscripts, as they kept their work coded, but the importance of the phoenix and the lapis within alchemical principles. The phoenix is obviously very important, but that does not get us any closer to understanding what it is or why it is so highly regarded. Alchemy is a sort of derivation of Arabic, Hermetic, and ancient Greek mystery cults, which ultimately have deeper origins in Egypt and Sumerian fertility religions. This leads us to explore what exactly did the Egyptians and the Greeks think of the phoenix, from which the legend comes from in the first place. So the Egyptian myth surrounding the golden and fiery red phoenix involves its death every 500 years, at which point it builds itself a nest of myrrh before burning up, and a new phoenix arises from those ashes. To understand this next theory, we are going to explore these ancient religions and fertility cults of Egypt and the civilizations around Sumeria and the Levant, which means the language is going to get somewhat graphic and vivid, so you have been warned. The following statement will probably have you rolling your eyes, but I promise by the end of it, you will be convinced, or at least start to think of it differently. The phoenix is an amanita muscaria personification. The word phoenix comes from the Greek phonix. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but I'll put it up so you can see what it looks like, which is the same word that the Phoenicians were named after. So Phoenix and Phoenicia share a common root, or they were named after each other, or they just had the same name, essentially. It seems to mean something that is roughly reddish or reddish purple. The Phoenicians were known as traders producing luxury goods, especially their famous dye from Tyre, located in modern-day Lebanon. The use of Phoenician to describe this culture had a double meaning, referencing their famous purple dye and the sun. This is why the phoenix is seen as a fiery red bird and not strictly a purple bird. Even in the etymological studies of Phoenician, it seems the idea of the color red is inescapable, and the reference to the purple dye is secondary to the reasoning behind the name. This reddish purple is of course found in the Amanita muscaria, which would have grown abundantly during this time period in that area along the Mediterranean Sea. The way the sun sets and rises in the area, with the mountains, clear skies, and vast sea, certainly would inspire the idea of it being a land of fiery red and deep violets. The biblical name for these people were the Canaanites, Canaan being a Hebrew word for, again, the reddish purple color, reinforcing the notion that this place had a strong color association. There is also the Amanus Mountains located in this region from which the Greek amanita comes from. So we need to establish a few connections associated with mushroom mythology. The first is the sun and moon, the next is serpents, and finally birds, as well as the reproductive organs of men and women. Since there is a lot going on, I will try to keep explanations simple and easy to follow. Individually, some of this may seem confusing, but in context of each other, you begin to see clearly an interrelated cosmological view of the world and universe among these ancient fertility fungus cults. The sacred mushroom, the Amanita muscaria, follows this biological process, from which we can break down its equivalent and significance within so-called mythology. We will start with rain. Rain was seen as seminal fluid coming from the sky, being ejected from the sun, which itself is equated to the masculine reproductive organ, and specifically the tip. This is the origin of belief of sky deities, such as Deus of the Proto-Indo-European fertility cults. From there we have Zeus, Jupiter from the archaic Latin Dies Piter, the Celtic Dagda, the Vedic Dios, the Nordic Odin, and of course the Latin word for God, usually associated with the Christian god, Deus. And there are many more sky deities from all across Europe to India. It is where we get the word for day. Technically, the connection between Sky Father and rain was in later iterations, such as with Zeus, and still some kept the sky reign separate, as with Odin and Thor. The etymology deriving from Deus is very extensive, so you can pause it and take a look at this picture if you need to. But thunder plays a huge role in mushroom growth. For some reason, fungal growths are encouraged by thunder, which is why thunder became associated with so many gods. It fits in as the heralding of the sacred fungi in mushroom lore. In the Bible, anytime God made an appearance, it was accompanied by stormy weather and thunder, the first indication we are dealing with a mushroom-related religion and god. The amanita fruit begins its life as a small white bulb appearing from the ground. Its appearance and functionality as an egg is where we first see comparisons to birds, serpents, and the moon. The moon is most often associated with the feminine. The mushroom fruit at this point is actually encased in what is called a vulva, spelled with an O, and it is related to the human anatomical vulva. It's compared to a womb and an egg, and coming from the underground, just like a snake. Snakes were seen as being connections to the underworld, while birds were connections to the cosmos or the heavens. Already we can glimpse into the dichotomy of the mushroom's dual nature as a bridge between worlds. And we can also understand how the underworld motif often was thought of not like a hell, as with our modern idea anytime we hear the underworld, but it's a much more complex realm from which things like mushrooms come from, a metaphorical or metaphysical place even, perhaps, that gods dwell in. The Egyptian underworld Duat is depicted by a circle with a star in the middle in hieroglyphs, perhaps a mushroom cap view from the top down. The star connection we will explore shortly. Another name for the Egyptian underworld is amenti, symbolized by what appears to be a mushroom from the side perspective and philologically related to amanita. Ra, who was combined with Amun, another possible philological link to amanita, and was worshipped as Amun-Ra, the Egyptian god of the sun, descends into the underworld Duat every night to battle the serpent Apep. This adds to the notion of the sun, mushroom, serpent, underworld link. Ra being depicted as a falcon furthers the equation of birds into the overall mushroom lore. And after a short period of time, the mushroom swiftly shatters its vulva and expands into a dome-like shape. The characteristic white spots are remnants of the mushroom's womb. Fully mature, the round mushroom reveals its red or gold skin, representing the sun, while the remaining specks of white are compared to stars, as the mushroom is a microcosm of the universe itself. This idea has lived today in the form of an alternate name for the mushroom vulva, called the universal veil. This shedding of the vulva is also consistent with snake comparisons, as they too shed their skin. Not only does the mushroom represent the sun and moon, it also represents the male and female reproductive organs, combining womb, stem, and tip in one. In this way, the mushroom god was a hermaphrodite, the word combining the god Hermes and the goddess Aphrodite. The Ankh, which symbolized the duality of female and male as womb and rod, ultimately depicts a mushroom. From the Ankh, we get a symbol of Mercury, the Roman version of Hermes, a male god with more feminine qualities. The alchemical symbol Mercury is very much the same as Isis, depicted with bull horns and an ankh. The symbol eventually evolved to our current symbol of female. I believe this idea of dual genders of the sacred mushroom survived in alchemy in the form of the rebus, the ultimate goal of an alchemist's work, to create from one thing two. Again, I do not think the alchemists of medieval and Renaissance times knew all these legends of the ancient mystery religions were so involved with psychedelic and hallucinatory substances, especially mushrooms, but it is clear to see they were influenced by all the same lore. The legends that came from those mushroom cults is what inspired alchemists. But just without the context, they made up their own cosmology, which has eluded and fascinated scholars for many years. I have read arguments that the alchemists knew and used psychedelics, but I do not think there is very much evidence for that. They had the lore of the mushroom, but not the central object, the fungus itself. The imagery parallels ancient mythology because it was inspired by and drew from it. And going back to Egypt, we have the famous Isis and Osiris myth. Osiris's brother, Set, murders Osiris, and to revive her brother and husband, Isis finds the scattered body parts of Osiris and rebuilds his body. In some retellings, the one part that is never recovered is Osiris's reproductive organ. Either way, Isis becomes impregnated by Osiris, sometimes through magic, sometimes through lightning. Osiris could have been a personification of the psilocybin mushroom, in large part due to his green coloration. Isis is an amanita. Either way, they are mushroom god personifications. Osiris impregnating Isis through some impossible form of conception is what we see in mushroom lore. That it is a self-reproducing organism, and it certainly would have looked that way. This is one of the most important motifs in fertility cults. The hermaphroditic fungus god is both a virgin and possessing potent fecundity. The mushroom lends itself to virgin births, a common archetype found many times beyond Christianity. The ability of the fungus to grow without seed was a source of many myths, playing on the duality of self-resurrection and immortality. Perhaps by now you can see the Egyptian legend of the phoenix starting to take form. The immortal bird, fiery red and gold, the colors of the fungus, possessing the ability to grow from its own ashes. Since this is meant to be about the phoenix, we are going to spend more time on the bird association with the amanita. Beyond its hallucinatory effects, the amanita gives the feeling of flight during meditation and sleep, a source of the Russian flying reindeer shamans from which our Santa Claus myth comes from. Looking back to Isis, she is often depicted with bird wings. In this particular image here, we get a glimpse to the outer layer of the wings, red with white spots. The feathers then, we can conclude, represent the gills of the underside of the mushroom. You can imagine the complete circle of Isis's wings, the removed section making way for the hieroglyphs. And the fact that the Egyptian halo is this red sun amanita symbol, now that we know the connection between the ancient view of the sun and its representation of the mushroom. The Guild sun found its way into the Christian halo, and the phoenix has a number of comparative birds of myth throughout the world, as it is considered a motif. Powerful birds capable of numerous mythical feats like the Hindu Garuda, the Persian Simurgh, the Chinese Feng Huang, the Slavic Firebird, and the Thunderbird of some indigenous American nations. Even Quetzalcoatl of the Aztec combines the snake and bird, as it is depicted as a feathered serpent, and we know mushrooms played a huge role in that culture. Almost every single god or goddess has some association with botanical organisms. And this is true for most of the world. Plants and fungi cannot be separated from religion and mythology if we want to understand them to any degree of reality. Earth was created from a lotus flower opening up as it floated on the primordial waters in Egyptian mythology. This immediately sounds like a psychedelic explanation for the universe, like a fractal blossoming. And it just so happens that the lotus flower from Egypt, called now a blue lily, has psychoactive effects when consumed or inhaled. We know the Egyptians used this flower extensively, and so were no strangers to botanical hallucinogens. The Scarab Beetle offers another iteration of the mushroom lore for Egypt. Here you have a creature which rolls the dung, often from cows, another important creature in many cultures like Hindu, Judaism, and of course Egypt. The same dung that produces psilocybin mushrooms. The scarab must have been seen as some sort of cultivator or guardian of this precious spiritual fungi. And similar to the fungi and the phoenix, the scarab seems to rebirth itself as its brood is laid inside the dung, so by the time a baby scarab comes out of the dung ball, it is fully mature, appearing to live immortally. This death and resurrection that is so important to Egyptians is once again reflected in the sun. Khepri is a scarab god tasked with rolling the sun up the sky every morning, just like it does for dung. Interesting side note, Jesus was compared to the dung beetle by numerous church authors throughout the dark and medieval ages of Europe, probably not realizing just how deep that connection went. I know this video is already getting long, but the relationships between language, lore, and mushrooms is so much more extensive. If you want me to go into more depth on any topic, let me know, but to give some more quick examples of this, the Mycenae were one of the earliest Greek cultures, and that name comes from the Greek root mukase, which means mushroom, and ultimately where we get the word mycelium. Medusa is another mushroom lore mythology. Perseus, the slayer of Medusa, is actually the founder of the city Mycenae. Medusa being represented as a hair of snakes hardly needs to be mentioned into how or why it relates to mushroom lore. Perseus was also said to be the founder of Persia in one mythology. And if he is not the founder of Persia, it is thought that the name comes from that area into Greek. So already from the earliest Grecian mythologies, there's plenty of influence from the Middle East. The introduction of Dioenesis reinforces this. The Cult of Dioenesis is another drug and mushroom mystery fertility cult that predates the original fungus-worshipping Christians, but was similarly snuffed out by the Romans around the same time. The famous story of Pandora and the box, I think, can also be philologically traced to the Sanskrit word for panther, which is Pand-ara, which means white or yellow. Keep in mind, almost all European, Indian, and Middle Eastern languages share a common ancestry, which is referred to as Proto-Indo-European, or Pi. Panther is, of course, a big cat, notable for its spots. Panther was another name often used for the amanita. And if we understand this connection, then Pand-ara and the Greek Pandora is in fact the amanita fungus. To this day, panther is still used to describe a related species of the Amanita muscaria, as the Amanita pantherina, or the panther cap. Pandora, the first woman opening the box, is sometimes equated to Garden of Eden in Genesis. Both are attempted by curiosity, and both unleash hardship and evil in the world. But with the proper understanding of mushroom lore, we see that both Eve and Pandora are allusions to the Amanita. That original myth may very well be a warning story, as the Amanita pantherina is so closely related to the muscaria that it must have been often mistaken and eaten. Panther caps are said to be more poisonous than the muscaria. By opening the box or eating the fruit from the tree of knowledge, by literally eating the false mushroom, sickness is misery, and misery is brought to the person. That being said, it's probably more likely that there may not have even been a distinction between the two species. Perhaps it just comes down to eating the mushroom raw, which tends to be more dangerous regardless of the species. So it was only after being rebirthed in the fire that the Amanita awakens. The process of the phoenix in Egyptian mythology, and again by the alchemists who were fascinated by that concept and applied it to their science, it must be refined either by cooking or boiling. Some more Greek-related stories include Jason and the Golden Fleece, the Minoans of Crete, just their general religion in any of their mythologies, Persephone and Hades, Apollo, and the list really just goes on and on. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey are rife with mushroom lore. The Greeks also adapted the phoenix into their myths, which of course is where we get the actual word phoenix for. To round out the phoenix myth is its nest of myrrh and herbs it builds itself before being reborn. I think there is another connection here to drug plant usage. Myrrh was a very sought-after resin in the ancient world and was used for a number of offerings and incense burnings, giving mild relaxing effects as well as a wide variety of health benefits. These effects seem to be enhanced with other herbs and resins like frankincense, and we know from Judaism that the high priests in their sacred anointing rituals used a concoction of myrrh, frankincense, and cannabis, along with a few other herbs and resins. This anointing likely centered around the preparation for mushroom trips, or mushrooms were included in the recipe. Either way, it is something the Israelites likely picked up from the Egyptians. Mentioned before was the lapis, meaning stone, and romanticized by alchemists as the lapis philosophorum. In the stone lapis lazuli, we actually see another name for the amanita. Lazuli comes from the Persian lazur word, which means something like spotted. So lapis lazuli means spotted stone. Lazarus from the Bible uses the same root word as lazuli. It was a play on words, as he was a sickly, leprous, and ulcerous character in the Bible, hence why he was named Spotted. Or he was named after a word derived from spotted, right? And once more, we see a theme of resurrection when dealing with mushroom lore. Lapis lazuli being yet another amanita name. A purplish, spotted stone, just like the amanita. When coming full circle, the alchemists used the phoenix and the lapis philosophorum and the rebus almost interchangeably to describe their ultimate work. The end goal of their science and research, one way or another, the alchemists concluded, based on what they interpreted from ancient mystery cults, that these ideas represented the same magical and esoteric force, the hermaphrodite, the spotted stone, the phoenix. Thanks for watching.